Catastrophic events are sudden, man-made, or natural incidents that cause widespread destruction and, in some cases, loss of life. We're still in the grips of a global pandemic, and Hawaii is especially vulnerable to natural disasters, including hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions. So when the next catastrophic event hits the state, will we be ready? We'll talk with emergency response leaders to see how Hawaii is preparing. Tonight's live broadcast and live stream of insights on PBS Hawaii start now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Laura Yamada. Well, in modern history, Hawaii has lived through its share of catastrophic events. The attack on Pearl Harbor, the 1946 tsunami, Hurricane Iniki, and of course several Kilauea eruptions. Most recently, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed the state to various weaknesses. And while we've dodged some very close calls, we've seen the destruction that can be caused by heavy rain and flash flooding as well. Most catastrophic events are unpredictable, so is the state ready to take action when the next disaster hits? We're going to ask our panel tonight. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can email, call, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org and the PBS Hawaii Facebook page. All right, now to our guests. Luke Myers is a certified emergency manager who is the administrator for the Hawaii Emergency Management Agency, or HAIMA. He graduated from the University of Hawaii with a degree in geography. In his spare time, he enjoys running, water sports, and weather watching. Hirokazu Toya is the director of the City and County of Honolulu Department of Emergency Management. He has a bachelor's degree in industrial and systems engineering and a master's of public health degree. He's lived through real-world catastrophic incidents, including being an evacuee during Hurricane Katrina. All right, on to Matthew Gonzer. He serves as the City and County of Honolulu Chief Residence Resilience Officer and is the Executive Director of the city's Office of Climate Change, Sustainability and Resiliency. Prior to his appointment, he was the city's Coastal and Water Program Manager. And Diane Peters-Wynn is the Regional CEO for the Pacific Islands region of the American Red Cross. In addition to disaster response, the nonprofit focuses on emergency preparedness and training for Hawaii students. The Kamehameha School's graduate has a degree in French and a master's degree in international affairs. So thank you so much to all of you for joining us. No doubt all of you have been very busy, not only throughout the incidents that happen all year long, but also because of this pandemic that's happened. So let's just start with one of you. Maybe we'll start with Luke, with you first, just talking about this COVID-19 pandemic. How would you describe it from your lens, from your area of expertise? Has it been an eye-opening experience navigating through this?
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight. From an emergency management professional, as a husband and a father, living out here in the Middle Pacific, I would consider COVID-19 unprecedented. I know we've heard that word a lot. I think many of the subject matter experts that we have here tonight have seen lots of emergencies and disasters, but for one that's not only impacted Hawaii, the Pacific, the United States, and the globe all at the same time, now for 14 or 15 months, it's really been an eye-opening experience and has really challenged a lot of our thought processes when we look at emergencies. But I think the other big element, it really has shown the resiliency of not only the people of Hawaii, but of the rest of the world, to be in an incident that just, it's kind of like Groundhog's Day. You wake up every morning and you have the same set of challenges and the same resources, and you have to work through that with other real world situations.
Yeah, and Hirokazu, let me turn to you, because we were thinking about in some of the sessions we've had before about what's called sort of a cycle of disaster and disaster preparedness. And this is so unusual with a pandemic. It doesn't follow a typical cycle, let's say, that you might respond to for Hurricane Katrina, for example. So what's been your perspective? How would you describe what it's been like dealing with the impact of COVID-19?
Yeah, good evening, Laura. Thanks for having me. And definitely agree with Luke. You know, COVID's been really unique in a lot of ways. And, you know, it's not a physical disaster. It doesn't just affect one county, one state, or even one country. It's affected the entire world, right? So there's definitely a lot of unique things about it, but it really brings to light what we've been saying for all other disasters, that it's all about the whole community. It can't just be about a government response. So what it's really brought to light during these past 15 months or however long we've been in this, it seems like forever, is that government really can't be the only solution. We are certainly part of it, and we have a huge role to play, but really takes the whole community coming together. And just there's a lot of limitations that government has in terms of resources that we have, policies, authorities, and things like that. And the speed at which government can move isn't always that fast. With COVID, we had this huge injection of funds from the federal government in the form of the CARES Act initially. That allowed us to do a whole lot of things. But that's really unique to COVID. With most disasters, we're not going to see that kind of injection of federal funds immediately. So definitely a lot of unique elements to it. But again, it really brought to light the fact that emergency response of any type, it really takes the whole community rather than just government being the answer.
And Diane, when you think about, the emergency response and emergency preparedness is something like this, from your lens and from your seat, what would you say has been some of the biggest vulnerabilities that COVID-19 pandemic has exposed for the state?
Well, and I think as Hiro just mentioned, it's the public-private partnerships, the partnership for us as a nonprofit organization and working with the government, but not only that, with our other nonprofit organizations, with corporations, businesses, individuals, the challenges that we've been, dealing with since the beginning of the pandemic. Really, there are so many. I was brand new. Here comes Hurricane Douglas, barreling down towards the islands, a Category 4 at its height hurricane. I'm 2 weeks into the job, so it was a little bit like drinking out of a fire hose. But for the local Red Cross here, I think we were able to put into place some of these protocols that had been developed nationally in terms of really retooling all of the procedures. So from doing the health screening as people would come into the shelter to be prepared for social distancing within the shelters, having PPE, folks to be masked, having a place for them to be quarantined, all of those things. And I think also some of the other challenges, our volunteers, 90% of our work is done by volunteers, and they are of an older age demographic. Those are the folks that do have time to volunteer. So we really had to scramble and, again, work with our partners, but we continued to reach out and focus much more on recruiting younger workers for our shelter workers, and really develop that as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. In this particular type of catastrophe, or an extreme situation, because they couldn't help in the way that they and coordinate in a way that you have for other types of catastrophic events. So how unusual, knowing that, okay, you can't gather, you can't come within a certain amount of contact. There's also more vulnerability for older volunteers who are oftentimes within the ranks in large numbers.
Yes, and Laura, I would also add that the way that the National Red Cross does things is usually to send a whole team in, 50 people, to help with sheltering, because our local staff and volunteers are often busy taking care of their own family and homes. But this time for Hurricane Douglas, they didn't do that, because if they would have sent a team of 50 people, those people would have been stuck in their hotels and they wouldn't have been able to get out. So we had, our local volunteers as best we could. And then the management piece was really a new model. It was remote and using teams. And so there was a lot of mentoring and coaching, but that was something very different.
So we're going to get definitely some of these large disasters. But before we completely move away from COVID, I just wanted to touch base with you, Matthew, on, when you're listening to some of your colleagues speak here and talking about what the impact has been, whether we're talking about vulnerabilities that have been exposed or lessons learned. What stands out to you?
That's exactly what I was hoping to talk about, is really the lessons. I mean, from what Luke shared in terms of the term resilience, right? It's not some kind of end state. It's really about learning from things so that we are better positioned moving forward. And the uniqueness of the COVID disaster and pandemic relative to a hazard event has really highlighted hard community lessons that we need to carry forward to transform and benefit community island-wide. It highlighted and put a magnifying glass on existing inequities, strains and stresses that already existed across community that really would challenge our ability to perform in a moment of crisis like a hurricane or some other natural hazard event. And if we don't take those to heart and learn about these new programs and partnerships that we have developed or potentially strained through COVID response and recovery, Hiro alluded to the speed and the constraints sometimes of government. And that's why it's important to have partners like Red Cross, and it's important to have others that are better positioned to be the community-based hubs and to be the service providers if we can just ensure that we can connect on resources. So those are the kinds of things that I think are really critical. And after a hazard event, there's usually some kind of after action report. It's very difficult to write that in terms of the COVID-19 response after action report, because we're still in it. But there are no shortage of lessons that I think island-wide community conversations are really expecting some transformation moving forward as we're looking into economic recovery and transformation.
That's a really good point about the after action report, because you expect things to end in a sense at a certain time so you can assess, but it just keeps kind of dragging on in a bunch of different ways. Well, we're going to get back to some of the lessons learned overall and how that applies to the work that all of you are doing now. But let's move ahead a little bit with this being the start of hurricane season. And as Diane had been starting to talk about, for example, what happened last year with us dodging a bullet with Hurricane Douglas. Let's talk about that a little bit more with the hurricane season kicking up, and where you feel the state, if the state is ready to respond if we were to get a direct hit, which maybe we don't know how soon that may or may not be. So maybe we'll circle back to Luke and get your response on that first.
Yeah. From a preparedness perspective, we learned a lot of lessons with Douglas. We also had a lot of peers last year in the continental United States who were hit with multiple hurricanes. So from lessons learned with the non-congregate sheltering, we had the COVID requirement of we're asking people not to come together, and in a hurricane situation, someone may have to evacuate their home and eventually come together. So we did have some lessons learned from Hurricane Douglas and from some of the hurricanes on the continental United States. I think the other big thing that we just have learned, and it's important for hurricane season, is it doesn't take a direct hit and it doesn't take a Category 3 storm. Many of the storms that have impacted the state have not been greater than a Category 1, and they have not made direct hits. As we saw with Hurricane Lane, and like Diane, I was on the job, I think a week when Hurricane Lane was approaching us.
I think we have a picture of that, just so you know. We're going to show a graphic of Hurricane Lane. Continue.
Very impressive. And with that storm, we had a lot of concerns about a landfall on Oahu or the other islands. But in Hurricane Lane, though it never actually directly impacted the islands, it dropped 50 inches of rain on the Big Island,
which we're seeing video of
rain
right now, by the way.
Hawaii. And the flooding that we saw and the landslides as a product of that storm, that was a big lesson. And with many of our tropical systems, we don't have to see a landfall. We don't want the public to focus on the track of the storm or the eye of the storm. We want them to get ready to be prepared for a number of different impacts. So I think that was the big lesson learned in how we prepare for this hurricane season. I think the other big change is we have the Safe Travels program with COVID-19 and the quarantine that was in place. Fortunately, last summer we had a lot of empty hotels. We didn't have many visitors here. This summer, we're in a much different dynamic. Our baseline community profile, we have 30,000 visitors a day coming into the state. We have some hotels that are open. We have some of the public that has been vaccinated. So we have a much different dynamic that we had than last summer. There may be additional resource constraints and there may be additional resources. So we're looking at all these things as we prepare with the Red Cross, the counties, and our federal partners for whatever may come our way.
And I definitely feel like I could open up this question to any one of you as we get into hurricane season. Whom else? Maybe we'll turn to you, Diane, and feel free, any of you, to if you want to raise your hands. When we're heading into this season now, we're thinking about, as Luke mentioned, how we reacted and how things have changed just since then. What are your thoughts as far as the state being prepared, the state and or the region, I should say, being prepared, and whether it's a direct hit or not?
Well, and I think Luke's point was right on, spot on, because it doesn't take a direct hit. And also, when you just look at last year being the worst disaster year on record, with 22 events, disasters costing over $1 billion. I mean, that's incredible. And I think, it only takes one, and it doesn't even take a direct hit. So I think, we like to say be Red Cross ready, but it means, be aware, expect these things, the general, for all kinds of disasters and emergencies, the Red Cross likes to say, have a plan, make a kit, and keep informed. Those are the 3 broad guidelines, but obviously there's lots of little things that factor into that. So, I'll let my colleagues jump in, but it's definitely something to be concerned and be serious about.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, I definitely want to build on what Luke and Diane said. For us, Hawaii's, I think the viewers can appreciate, we're unique in a lot of ways here, right? We're about 2,400 miles away from the continental US. Our counties are separated by water. So when a hazard is heading our way, we really have nowhere to go but inland. And in a lot of cases, the resources that are on island, we may be able to bring in some additional help from the outside pre-impact, but probably not, in any kind of substantial way. And like Diana alluded to, there's been a lot of disasters lately. Since 1980, there's been 285 disasters that have cost $1 billion or more. And 119 of them have been since 2010. So, you can attribute some of that to migration of people and where, towns are being built up, but there's something going on there as well. Hawaii has had one of those, right? Hurricane Iniki. And so besides COVID in recent years, Oahu really hasn't had a truly catastrophic physical disaster that's impacted us. So Luke was talking about Hurricane Lane. Even with its track not making direct impact, dumped 50 inches of rain on the Big Island. Well, we had some consultants do an analysis of what would have happened with Hurricane Lane had that left turn that it made been a little bit later, and it had been after we had impacted us. And so when they looked at that scenario, it would have been Hurricane Lane impacting Oahu as a Category 1 storm. And that would have, it's projected to have cost us $3.7 billion just in building losses. Had it been a Cat 2, it would have been tens of billions of dollars. And so that's not even talking about the potential loss of life or human suffering. That's just talking about building loss, right? So it's really hard to kind of quantify the potential impacts that we might see here. But in terms of preparedness, again, there's certain things that government needs to prepare for. But like Diane was talking about, we do also want to emphasize the preparedness message for the community, that it's not just going to be about government taking action. It's got to be individuals and households taking actions to prepare themselves and protect themselves better. So on our side, we've actually during COVID, of course, a lot of our focus was diverted in that direction, but we have been able to do some work in terms of assessing the shelter facilities that we have. So we actually have a lot better idea now of which facilities are safer for us to use during a tropical cyclone event. Using a more recent assessments of these buildings, primarily DOE schools. So at least for Oahu, we've been able to do that, but definitely still a lot of work to do in terms of not only getting facilities ready, but the response side ready, people ready, systems ready. But do want to emphasize the preparedness message for our community.
I want to track on that just a little bit more because it lends to a question that one of our viewers asked, Tom on Oahu here. He's asking, my family lives in a wooden home on Oahu. I don't know where specifically, and in the event of a Category 2 or higher hurricane, we would need a safe concrete shelter to go to. And he says he's read that of the 15 shelters available on Oahu, none is rated safe for winds above a Category 1 speed. So he wants to know what his options are for where he might take his family during a storm that's stronger than a Category 1 strength. What have you learned, and what can you share?
Yeah. Actually, the viewer has a very good point there, and most of the facilities that we have available as shelters, we call them shelters, but really there's certain definitions associated with them from FEMA and even with the state standards. So what we actually have aren't truly shelters. We call them best available refuge areas. So they are better alternatives for people who might live in a single wall construction home, for instance, or people who live in a flood prone area. And we are choosing the best facilities that are available to us. And of course, HAIMA continues to do retrofits to these buildings to make them even stronger. But one thing to consider is, are there alternatives that you have amongst your family or friends whose homes are built a little bit stronger? Something that's not a single wall construction home. Maybe they have a little better window protection. So it's something that you got to work out with people ahead of time. You don't want to surprise them in the middle of a hurricane saying, hey, like, can I come crash at your place? So really that's where we're at now. The reality is that our public refuge areas or shelter spaces are really meant to be last resort.
And I think, Luke, that kind of leads to you adding to this too. I just want to make sure that Tom here hears from you as far as what the options are, what's being looked at, what he needs to think about, because he's concerned that there aren't places that he would be safe enough if it was stronger than a certain level.
Yeah, to echo, it's a great question, and for any family in the islands, when you have a storm approaching, the first thing you should know your hazard. You should know how strong your home is. What type of impacts, whether it's flood, landslide, winds, or even fire. We saw during storms. In 2018, we had fires during tropical systems approaching the islands. But to reinforce what Hiro was saying, our message is that the shelters are shelters of last resort. If you know a family or friend that has a more sturdy structure or something that's been retrofitted, you need to take that personal accountability beforehand, and as part of your plan with a landfalling system or approaching system, be able to take refuge with them if your house is not safe. And then depending on what county you're in, identifying where those potential shelters are they walkable distance? Do you have to drive to it? Do you have any special needs in getting there? What are you supposed to bring to the shelter? So you have all those items that, from Diane's side and Hiro's side and others that, one, knowing your house, is it going to be safe? And then what are you going to bring with you if you have to leave your home?
All right, well, let's shift a little bit here, talking about climate change. And I want to turn to you, Matthew, on this one to start. How would you describe right now, and what would you point out as far as the threats of climate change to people here in Hawaii? What's your current assessment?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I know we're here mostly to talk about hazards and events and how climate change is increasing some of those risks. But we would actually be remiss if we didn't also talk about what is fueling and increasing those risks and driving climate change, and that is human greenhouse gas emissions. I'm very pleased and excited to share with you that just yesterday, City Council adopted Honolulu's first ever climate action plan, which charts our path to reducing and eliminating greenhouse gas pollution so that we can not only make a whole slew of community and economic improvements, but also really stave off the worst of the climate change impacts. And we actually have an undergoing project and a climate adaptation strategy called Climate Ready Oahu, and that's the same website, climatereadyoahu.org. And in that first phase climate risk assessment, we looked at the 5 top climate hazards of concern. And in talking with community members, and talking with scientists, city agencies, and looking at the literature, risk is really a function of likelihood and consequence. And we're talking about hurricanes, which clearly are, this triple threat, huge catastrophic potential consequence. But when we look at, again, likelihood and consequence, it's really these changing baselines of sea level rise and increasing temperatures that we are undoubtedly going to need to prepare for. The science is clear-eyed about, increasing trends in direct relationship with greenhouse gas emissions and greenhouse gas pollution. So in addition to the great preparedness and response work that agencies like Red Cross, HAWAIʻI, and DEM do, there's so many things that we need to get proactive about to prepare communities for really a climate changed future. And these are things that will also provide some benefits and opportunities on environmental and community conditions, whether it's around green infrastructure or more community forestry, right? Trees in our neighborhoods to help manage rainfall and manage heat. That's not to say those other hazards aren't of concern, right? We actually know, the science tells us that we're more likely to be affected by a hurricane, not because of more storms being generated necessarily, but because with increasing ocean temperatures, the storm tracks are actually migrating northward. So we're a little bit more in the path there. And then, as you pointed to in the beginning, it's very difficult to forecast and predict something like a rain bomb, where we saw in 2018 in East Honolulu, where in thinking about impact to community, primarily island-wide, it was not a big event. But if you were a Waimanalo resident or an Ainahaina resident, it was extremely catastrophic. So thinking across the opportunities for preparedness, from government taking action today, community also supporting and recognizing the need for change, because when change is coming to your shoreline, doing nothing really isn't an option. So some of these things will require upfront investments to ensure that we have benefits and reduce risk into the future.
I want to expand on that a little bit more, Matthew, when we think about getting a larger movement of people, whether it be the politicians, the decision makers, the investors, or the community at large, to understand and connect to the impact of climate change right now. I know, with at least in past years, no doubt, it's been one of those issues that a lot of people have a difficult time feeling the urgency of. So what has been the most effective to you in showing people, in explaining to them, getting them motivated, inspired, understanding what kind of impact this is having on their lives right now and why action is needed?
I think really the residents get it, and it's a testament to their acute awareness and observations over time that voters even elected to create such an Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. But one of the most clear pieces of evidence is coastal erosion and shoreline change, whether it's the North Shore or the West Side, impacts to areas like Mapunapuna. Granted, some of these are sort of engineered systems, or they were built on landfill historically. People are suffering business disruption. We have some reports of businesses closing in Mapunapuna just because of the constant disruptions. And then this tension right now between public trust resources and the hope to have beaches into the future, and the real life safety risk to certain structures and people that are still residing, when the shoreline used to be dozens to tens to a couple of hundred feet further into the ocean than we experience it today. That's a real difficult thing to come to terms with as an individual, but also as a community, to recognize, like, we have some choices, and if we don't acknowledge the risks and the trade-offs, we might lock ourselves into futures where we don't have things like sandy shorelines because we've elected to wall off the ocean.
Well, I definitely want to get back to talking about specifically about some of these catastrophic or potentially catastrophic events that are happening. But before we do, since we're on this track, one more question about development in these areas now. What we need to think about now, and I think this involves a number of you, when we think about knowing what these disasters, the kind of impact they're having, climate change exacerbating that, knowing that these storms are getting stronger, what do we need to be thinking about, and what should be changing as far as development in these areas of potential danger zones? Maybe Hiro, turn to you, also to you, Luke, if you wanted to start as well. Go ahead, Hiro.
Yeah, and I actually am gonna kick it back to Matt for a little bit, but certainly like for emergency management, our Kuleana is sort of in the consequence management side of things, and also looking at hazard mitigation projects and things like that. So we do actually keep a hazard mitigation plan for the city and county of Honolulu, which actually does relate closely with the work that Matthew's office does. So one of our priority actions that we collectively need to do as a city and as a government is looking at things like zoning and building code updates so that we can be ready for the future. In addition to that, looking at other more concrete projects, kind of literal and figurative, things like looking at the flood control project for the Kauaʻi Canal, for instance. Those become really more important. And we need to have other public works plans to protect the existing infrastructure. So definitely going to have a lot of opportunities financially. Actually, the federal government's kicking in a whole lot more money into the mitigation program. These are going to be competitive grants across the country, but we definitely got some opportunities to do some good hazard mitigation work, both in terms of policies, but also in terms of projects.
Well, no doubt, Matthew, this is in your area, but Luke, if you want to chime in here too, as far as what's within your scope when you're talking about looking at the areas that are already developed or being developed, and what's on your plate as far as how you're thinking about these discussions, how it's changing, what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, similar to Hiro, we have a statewide hazard mitigation plan, and we work with all the counties and FEMA on trying to bring in pre-disaster and post-disaster hazard mitigation dollars. I think the real challenge, two of the strongest forms of mitigation are land use and building code. They're passive forms of mitigation, and they set the blueprint for, as Matt was saying, where you want to go 5, 10, or 15, 20 years from now. Like we've seen with lava flows, like we've seen with hurricanes and flooding, even look at March 2021. We had 20 inches of rain on the north shore of Oahu in 24 hours. And that exposed existing infrastructure. Here we are several months later, we've gotten federal assistance, we've tried a number of resources to support and bring things in, but the real hard work starts when the life safety issues have been resolved, and you look how long it takes to reimagine or reinvent what infrastructure would be, the equity tied to that. Right now, working with FEMA and some of the large hazard mitigation funding packages are coming down. FEMA has two big areas that they are interested in: infrastructure, climate change, and then who's being served by those. We have a lot of sunk costs across this country in coastal areas. And even after you have an incident, it is very hard to change existing land use and building codes. So you really have to think about, when we have the next big incident, whatever that may be, that's the opportunity to start to say, okay, do we have damaged or destroyed infrastructure? Can we look at that? On a more long-term track, as infrastructure goes in, and I think this goes to some of the things that Matt is looking at in the other counties, how do we rebuild? Should we be looking at armoring the coastline, or should we be looking at maybe a managed retreat approach? If we have changes in our baseline hazards, as a species, we have to be adjustable and agile. So from a large mitigation perspective, we're very supportive and we work with the counties, but it's a decadal type of process. And I think that the land use and building codes are probably our strongest mitigation capability right now as we look out for the next 5 or 10 years at a minimum.
And again, back to you, Matt, what would you say is the most important work and initiatives that are happening right now that people need to be aware of, people need to be supporting, political leaders need to be getting behind?
I'll actually double down on what Luke and Hiro just said in terms of what is this community vision, right? We do have a hierarchy for trying to think about facilitating community change through time, and that's from our Oahu General Plan to our 8 regional community plans. And if you're a resident of the primary urban center, which is about Kahala through Pearl City, or a resident of the North Shore, right, Kaena through Kahuku almost, those are 2 regions of this island that are currently undergoing updates to their long-term plans. And these are the kinds of discussions that residents have received surveys to think about, engaged with our planning department, engaged in mostly virtual meetings at this point in time, or some of the citizen advisory committee meetings. Everyone is grappling with this because at some point, as the city also investigates our own assets, our infrastructure, and the services that we provide to people all around this island, we'll come across those difficult decisions of where will we be challenged in terms of just maintaining our own stuff? Where can we potentially facilitate land use change or growth or redevelopment to really take those life and safety measures to help get people out of harm's way? And what does that look like over time where people still see it as their community? It can be very jarring post a hazard event to lose everything that's right outside your door, right? You know, the eruption is a prime example of that. And Hawaii County, as they're thinking about buyout programs and just sort of the strain that can put on a group of people, right, that have come together as community, not just to get through an event, but to think about what does it mean if my community were to change? How does that affect me? How does that affect all of the relationships that I've established through time? These aren't easy things to do. So we definitely huge sympathies as people struggle with the economic strains today or the concerns about climate change into the future. But we also have to think about how do we support the maintenance and continuance of a thriving island community while looking at these different contextual approaches. And that admittedly is very, very challenging.
So many different layers to consider. All right, let's shift a little bit back toward some of these natural disasters that hit oftentimes, as we've been talking about, exacerbated by the impacts of climate change. So Diane, I mean, talking about American Red Cross, I mean, you were just at the heart of this, when these disasters happen and all of your volunteers. Talk a little bit about your workers, your volunteers manning these emergency shelters, the supplies that are needed. Talk to folks a little bit more about what you do and how the community can help organizations like yours.
Sure, but Laura, before I do that, I just kind of want to go back to the climate change discussion for just a second, because I think it's really important, and I just salute the city for taking this important step with the climate action plan. But I would say that the Red Cross now nationally has taken this issue to heart, and we have now a chief diversity officer that's going to oversee what the Red Cross does and really raise awareness. We are going to start with the low-hanging fruit and do some greening from within, so maybe looking at our fleet and things like that. But it's really critical, and I think, we're talking about Oahu, of course, we're talking about Hawaii, but the Red Cross, our Pacific Islands region, includes the U.S. territories in the Pacific. So our offices out in American Samoa and in Guam and Northern Marianas. And, when you look at some of these island nations, the island states, they are on the forefront of this fight against global warming. And as was mentioned earlier, the sea level rise, it's not 50 years away, it's happening. And it has immediate impacts. And so this is going to impact Hawaii as well, because as those places become unlivable, they have to go somewhere, those islanders. So these all, we're all connected. We're connected by this ocean. And it's sad for me I love the ocean, to be able to look down and see that the coral is being bleached and actually to feel the difference in the water. It feels warmer. That's scary. So, but anyway, back to your point about preparedness. I think, Luke was saying, what should people bring? So we know that what our shelters are very minimal. So we do ask people if they feel that they need to be in a safer place and they cannot shelter at home. We ask those evacuees to bring with them a kit that's got their important documents, their medications, but also their supplies with them as much as they can. So 2 weeks, the recommendation is 2 weeks of food, 2 weeks of water, as well as I said, your medications. If you have a pet, you should check first and see whether the shelter is pet friendly. So if it is, you would have to put your pet in a carrier and then bring the pet's food and water, and if the pet has medications. So those are lots of things to think about when you're really under stress and under pressure. So if you have space in your house and you can kind of assemble those together so that you don't have to run around and grab them, for other types of disasters, for example, we had a tsunami alert. You don't have as much time there. It's not really days. It might just be more a matter of hours where you have to grab your things and get to higher ground. So again, it's, have a plan, make a kit, and monitor the media.
And Diane, in the context of what we're still dealing with right now with the COVID-19 pandemic, I mean, of course, we hope that we'll continue to become a safer environment with more people getting vaccinated and lifting in certain areas and in certain ways. That being said, we are most certainly still dealing with it. There's still the possibility that we'll have another variant, another resurgence of some kind. So I would assume that people need to take into these considerations that they may have to factor into what happens if a natural disaster happens, if we're having to, potentially gather in a particular area. What do people need to also be prepared for in light of what's happened with this pandemic?
So nationally, the Red Cross has announced a return to congregate shelters versus the non-congregate hotel options. But here in Hawaii, we would say that we're still abiding by all of the CDC types of guidelines for COVID. We still want to have people bring their masks and wear them inside the shelters. We will still try to provide for enough space for social distancing. Again, do the health screening types of things. And if you have been vaccinated, and we encourage people to get vaccinated, you might want to bring your proof of vaccination with you. That said, we will not turn people away regardless of their vaccination status. So those are some of the things to think about.
And Luke, and here I would ask both of you, in this context, when we're thinking about here we are in hurricane season, here we are with actually at any point in time, really a potential for disaster to happen, still having to keep these considerations and part of the discussion as far as what's happening with that pandemic, that extra layer of complication. What is important to get across? What is important for the public to know? And what else is in the primary discussions that you're having that needs to be factored into the strategies as we move through this hurricane season related to COVID as well?
Yeah, from the state's perspective, we have a 6-step call to action for the public. The bottom line is the public needs to know the hazards where they live, work, and play. Whether it's a tsunami or it's a hurricane. We have a lot of areas in the state that are beautiful 99% of the time, and very quickly, and those tranquil conditions can turn treacherous. So just knowing where their hazards are. The other big message, for any disaster, including hurricane, Hero and each of the counties have a county alert notification system. So we challenge the public to sign up for those alerts. As Diane mentioned, trusting the media, trusting those local officials to tell you when things are going to get bad. You need to sign up for those. The other big thing that we've seen from the state perspective is we've uncovered that we have a lot of impacts in our community, food insecurity. COVID has exposed a lot of things, and I think Matt touched on this a little bit. Like any disaster, it exposes your community profile. And though we have a sense of resiliency in this state, we've seen food drives, we've seen a lot of impacts from COVID in the last year plus, and those conditions haven't went away. So whether it's 20 inches of rain in March or it's the next disaster, we have that fundamental kind of community profile right now. And so we know from a consequence management perspective to anticipate a lot of needs. And we're going to work with the public, we're going to work with Red Cross and the counties and our federal partners to bring in resources. So we acknowledge that there are more needs now than we probably have ever had in this state. And so with any future disaster in the coming year or so, we're going to have a lot of challenge to tackle.
And Hiro, I want to get your thoughts as well. And Robert here from Waikiki, addressing exactly what you brought up there, Luke. His question or statement saying, what is the question? What is the plan for getting food and supplies to Hawaii in the event of a major disaster, shipping, air freight, whatnot? So again, to your point, of people having these concerns and these insecurities during this time. Hiro, no doubt this is part of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, so for Oahu, we've got about 1 million residents. And pre-pandemic, for Honolulu, 40% of whom were ALICE, asset limited, income constrained and employed. And who knows what that number is now, right? Added on top of that is on any given day, 100,000 visitors to Oahu. Numbers are a little bit different now, but certainly more than what we had. We can expect a lot more this hurricane season than what we had last year. Still a lot of challenges remain in the community that existed predating the pandemic that were exposed during that time. So certainly have to account for that in our planning. And just go back a little bit to what Diane was talking about in terms of how to sort of posture yourself for this hurricane season and what to do in the event that you might need to evacuate to a shelter. I touched on earlier the constraints that we have in our refuge or shelter capacity. And the reality is that we may not be able to provide for effective social distancing in the event that we have to evacuate a large portion of our community. That's just the reality of it. We'll do the best we can. We'll work with the Red Cross and the Department of Health to do as much as we can. But of course, COVID is still around. So for those folks who haven't yet gotten vaccinated, really urge you, that's something you can control right now. And you don't want to be thinking about COVID during the middle of another disaster. And you might end up in a situation where you're huddled up close together with a bunch of strangers. And we don't want that to limit your evacuation option. We don't want you to be afraid of COVID so that you're actually going to put yourself in harm's way. And of course, last thing you want to be dealing with in the aftermath of a disaster is getting sick from COVID when our entire healthcare infrastructure might be compromised. So just do want to touch a little bit about the question that came in regarding the food situation. Luke's team actually did some good research and exposed a lot of the vulnerabilities that we have in our system. So I don't want to steal his thunder, but really there's significant potential for disruption to our transportation network, right? So whether it's land, sea, or air, we could anticipate a huge supply chain disruption. And that's not only limited to physical disaster, right? We actually, for a period of time during the pandemic, we were worried about our supply chain getting disrupted. And now, look at what's going on around the country and around the world. We could have a cyber incident that disrupts our supply chain. So it's not hurricanes only that we have to worry about in terms of our lives getting really badly disrupted, but that could kind of trigger a cascade of effects, where we have issues with fuel importation. If it's a physical disaster, then our utilities could get disrupted, our housing is disrupted. And the consequence to all these things happening is that our healthcare system could go down. We could basically lose access to our basic necessities like food and medication and things like that. Local commerce could stop, short-term, but potentially with long-term consequences. So we got 1 million people here with existing challenges. We're doing the best we can to prepare our response capabilities, but it's never going to be enough for catastrophic incident. So go back to what Luke was talking about in terms of the preparedness message. There's a lot of things that people could do. All of it seems daunting, but we could take small steps now to better prepare ourselves for the future.
So I want to turn to Luke because I think he's been addressing a lot of the work that you're doing. Is that correct, Luke? As far as, I mean, he's talking about the warnings of, hey, we need to be aware that this is a situation that I think a lot of people know. So what is being done to help knowing that these are concerns?
Yeah, the work actually goes back several years ago to 2017. There was some work done by HAWAIʻI and looking at Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and seeing some of a similar type of scenario where infrastructure is completely overwhelmed and you have to bring in resources. Fortunately for Puerto Rico, the resources were not that far away. Unfortunately for Hawaii, we know that it doesn't take long to see pictures where the Walmarts, the Targets, the Costco's, the Longs, wherever it may be, there is no milk. We have a system approaching. So a lot of efforts have went in to look at some of the supply chain challenges and then the opportunities that we have in working with FEMA and potentially other federal resources and trying to bring items in. You know, the big lesson that was shared through the critical systems analysis is if the Port of Honolulu, if we go down here, we have a hub and spoke, and we've seen this during COVID, commodities come into the port and then they go to the outer islands. And we've seen with our tropical systems that usually go from, they come from the east to the west, we can start seeing our port shut down for a week and a storm not even make a direct impact like we saw with Hurricane Lane. So, you know, I think the big message that's come out of this is that you can't rebuild a port overnight. You have to look at other long-term options. And we do have a number of working groups that include federal, state, and local partners and private partners and looking at an alternate port concept. But this is where, you know, there's many more of the public. So, you know, the challenge for them is try to have as many resources and items in your kit that are non-perishable that can get you up to 14 days.
So we've only
apologize.
We've only got about 4 minutes left, so I just wanted to make sure that we got to a couple of things as quickly as we possibly could, and maybe if we can keep the answers a little bit brief on this one. But as far as funding, where is everybody, how's everybody feeling right now, or what can you share as far as having the resources and the money to be able to respond, you know, again, as we hit this hurricane season?
I'll start from the national picture. Historically, the United States has been very good after an event, providing a significant amount of resources. This, even in itself, for the federal level, is not sustainable. So they're actually, under the new administration, the Biden-Harris administration, providing significantly more pre-disaster, what we call pre-disaster mitigation funding through a new program called BRIC. This was $500 million this most recent round. Coming up, it will be $1 billion because they recognize that we can't hemorrhage funds after the fact. There's so much greater benefit investing ahead of the time so that communities are prepared and that we're having these community resilience discussions 365 days of the year and not just thinking about a hurricane season. Right. I know knowledge can be a burden and it can feel daunting, but information is also empowerment. So the more we have programs like this, the more we have community conversations, whether it's climate, COVID, or hazard mitigation, the more we learn together and the better prepared we are to support each other through community resilience.
And we only have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask you, Diane, not only about the funding from a federal level, but also looking at the psychological impacts. I know that's something that the Red Cross is involved in some shape or form. What are you seeing now? What's the most important to share with folks as far as how that's being addressed?
So you're referring to psychological impacts from COVID?
From COVID, just these disasters as a whole, whether it be COVID or when we have, you know, this impacting the families.
Sure, and I think, you know, we've seen across the country the rise in you know, mental health issues, and the Red Cross takes that very seriously. I think we have a huge team of volunteers that during any disaster focus specifically on the mental health of the families and individuals that we're serving. So, it starts with self-care, and it starts with making good decisions. And we're fortunate to live in a beautiful place, but it's hard. It's a daily thing. And as my colleagues have mentioned, the stress, the economic stress. Speaking of our organization, we are always in a fundraising mode. We rely on the public to help fund us, our donors and companies and individuals, and it's nonstop. We need help all the time, and volunteers. We want to get the call out there. If anyone's interested in volunteering, please go to our website, and it's redcross.org/Hawaii, and find out how to volunteer.
Well, no doubt if we had a little bit more time, I'd be asking all of you all of these questions, but unfortunately, an hour goes very fast. So mahalo to all of you for joining us tonight, and we thank our guests. Haima Administrator Luke Myers, Honolulu Emergency Management Director Hirokazu Toya, Honolulu Chief Resilience Officer Matthew Gonzer, and Diane Peters-Wynn, Pacific Islands Regional CEO for the American Red Cross. All right, next week on Insights, as vaccination rates across the state slow down, are we still on track to reach herd immunity? We're going to get the latest progress report from health experts. Please join us then. I'm Larry Yamato for Insights on PBS Hawaii. Hui hou.